and defend all allies, and we are sending a clear message that we are ready to do so by increasing the presence in the eastern part of the lines. But again, it is Russia and President Putin that are responsible for the invasion of Ukraine, and President Putin should end this senseless war by withdrawing its forces from Ukraine.
Okay, Politico.
Thank you. I'm Lily from Politico. Why do the U.S. and NATO insist that fighter jets won't be helpful for Ukraine when the Ukrainians themselves say otherwise? Shouldn't it be up to the Ukrainian authorities to say what would be helpful for them? Thank you.
NATO allies are providing many different types of equipment, including advanced air defense systems, which have actually helped the Ukrainians to shoot down Russian planes, Russian missiles, and the allies continue to provide support also when it comes to different types of air defense systems. But I'm not going into the details of every type of supply, every type of support, exactly how and where, because I think that will just make it harder and more difficult to continue to provide this type of support. We are, NATO allies are stepping up and providing also advanced air defense systems.
Thank you. Ken Michaels, Wall Street Journal. To follow up on the earlier question, there have apparently been UAV incursions into NATO airspace. Apparently one Russian drone entered and left Polish airspace.
So
and
every
another
type
one
of
crashed in Russian drone entered and left Polish. How do you determine when something like that is an act of aggression or an act that warrants response? And you were talking earlier about escalation. How do you ensure that something like that is handled in a way that is appropriate and doesn't get out of control? Thank you.
Well, I cannot confirm the latest incidents you are referring to, but in general I can say that we are stepping up our vigilance, our presence, the way we monitor our airspace, and including by deploying new Patriot batteries to this part of the alliance. And by doing that, and also through our AWACS surveillance planes and increased air policing, air patrolling, we are both increasing the capabilities we have to monitor, to track, but also to ensure that we are able to react if needed. NATO's integrated air and missile defense tracked the flight path of an object which entered Romanian airspace on Sunday. In response, Romanian fighter aircraft scrambled immediately to investigate, and the Romanian authorities and NATO are reviewing this incident, as we're also reviewing the incident that ended with the crash of a drone in Croatia. The indications we have so far on the drone that crashed in Croatia outside Zagreb is that was not an armed attack, not an armed drone, but it just highlights that with more military activities in the air, with drones, with planes, there is risk for incidents, accidents, and therefore we need to be extremely vigilant. We need to react when needed, and we need to make sure that we have the communications, the line of communications also with the Russians, to prevent incidents from really creating dangerous situations. So that's the reason why we are increasing the presence and also the surveillance and monitoring of the airspace of NATO.
Bloomberg, lady in blue, just point. No.
Thank you for your question. Natalia Drozdia from Bloomberg. I just want to follow up on what you said in your introduction about the risk of false flag event and Russia maybe using chemical weapons. How would NATO respond in such a scenario? Is this a red line for potential NATO intervention? Thank you.
Any use of chemical weapons will be a violation of international law, will be a violation of the ban that the or the treaty that bans chemical weapons, and Russia has signed to that convention. We call on Russia not to use chemical weapons. We call on Russia to withdraw all its forces and stop the fighting, but in particular, not to use any chemical weapons. Russia has used chemical agents before to attack and actually kill political opponents. We have also seen that Russia has supported the Assad regime in Syria and helped to facilitate the use of chemical weapons several times in Syria. And any use of chemical weapons is absolutely unacceptable, and therefore it is also extremely important that Russia understands that it is unacceptable if they consider any use of chemical weapons, and we are also very vigilant about the possibility of them trying to stage some kind of pretext false flag operation to provide an excuse for any type of use of chemical weapons.
Okay, we'll go to NPR, Deutsche Welle, lady in pink.
Thank you very much. Just somewhat of a follow-up on Natalia's question. She was asking what NATO would do and whether this changes your red lines. So as you say that you are looking at NATO's military posture again, is this something that you would consider changing? You have said that this would be a war crime, and we know that simply warning Russia against doing something is not enough of a deterrent to stop it. So if NATO knows, or if NATO sees that a chemical attack could take place, and you say that's a war crime, would NATO consider changing the fact that it would not intervene in case of such a threat? Thank you.
Our main responsibility is to protect and defend all NATO allies. It is important that Russia understands that we are there to do exactly that. We have conveyed a very clear message to Russia about that we also see when they try to stage pretexts for the use of chemical weapons. We have seen that they, throughout this crisis, have tried to create different kinds of false flag operations to try to provide excuses for the use of force. We saw that in the lead-up to the intervention, and now we have seen them accusing Ukraine and also NATO allies developing chemical weapons, and that's an absolute lie, and therefore it also makes us a bit concerned about the possibility that they are actually planning to do that. And the President of the United States and other allies also made it very clear that if they use chemical weapons, there will be a high price to pay. But I will not speculate about any military response on the NATO side, except for saying very clear that NATO's main responsibility is to make sure we defend and protect all allies.
EPA, gentleman in white, just behind, yeah. No, okay. Frankfurt Allgemeine Zeitung.
Masuchka, Frankfurt Allgemeine Zeitung. Secretary General, after the demise of the INF Treaty, it's been NATO's position that the Russian deployment of SSC-8 will not be reciprocated by the deployment of medium or intermediate nuclear-capable missile systems. In the light of the Russian aggression against Ukraine and President Putin's threats, nuclear threats to NATO, in your view, does this stance need to be reviewed?
The demise of the INF Treaty was a serious setback for international arms control, because the INF Treaty, agreed in 1987, banned all intermediate-range weapon systems. Then, over the last years, over actually several years, we have seen that Russia has deployed a new missile, which violates this treaty, and then that led to the demise of the treaty a few years ago. We have stated from the NATO, and Russia has deployed these weapons over now several years, SSC-8. We have made clear that we will not mirror what Russia does. So we have plans to deploy nuclear-capable intermediate-range land-based systems in Europe. At the same time, we need to be able to make sure that we are able to respond and protect all allies, also in a new security environment where Russia has deployed more nuclear-capable missiles. And therefore, we have to do many things at the same time. We need to strengthen our air and missile defense. We are doing that. We need to invest more in advanced conventional capabilities, including fifth-generation aircraft. And I welcome the German decision to invest in fifth-generation aircraft. We need also to increase the readiness and our ability to monitor, detect, and of course we also need to make sure that NATO's nuclear deterrent remains safe and secure and effective. And that's exactly what we're doing when we are now making sure that we exercise and ensure the effectiveness of our nuclear deterrent.
Okay, we have Associated Press.
Hi, Mark from Associated Press. Mr. Secretary General, what do you know about the 3 European leaders visiting Ukraine today?
NATO allies and the European leaders have had extensive contacts with Ukraine and the political leadership in Ukraine, including with President Zelensky throughout the whole crisis and also the lead up to the crisis. I think it's important that leaders of NATO countries, of European member states, are engaging closely with President Zelensky. We will have the defense minister of Ukraine attending the NATO defense ministerial tomorrow by video link, and therefore I think it's important that we, at all levels in different formats, engage and meet with the Ukrainian political leadership.
Interfax.
Thank you, Interfax Ukraine, Irina Sommer. This morning, some mass media spread information about possible extraordinary summit, NATO summit, next week. Can you please confirm this? And second technical question. According to my information, it took for NATO bureaucracy 1.5 weeks to implement Ukrainian request for fuel. Can you please comment on this too? Thank you.
Well, NATO allies have provided a lot of different types of support to Ukraine. Some of this is channeled through the NATO framework, some are provided bilaterally, and for us it is important that we provide support on short notice and that we provide critical support which Ukraine needs. Overall, I think the message is that over many years, leading up to invasion, but also after invasion, allies have been very quick in stepping up and providing support. And again, I'm a bit reluctant to go into all the details about exactly how and where and when, but the overall picture is that allies are providing significant support, and they have done some on short notice, and that's different types of weapons, but also that includes fuel. NATO allies have consulted and coordinated closely over several weeks, both in the lead up to the invasion, but also after the invasion. We had a virtual summit just one day after, and we will have different ministerial meetings, also extraordinary ministerial meetings, and we will have an extraordinary defense ministerial meeting tomorrow. Then we are able to convene also a NATO summit with all the NATO leaders on short notice, but I cannot go into more details about that now.
Okay, we'll take a couple of questions online. We'll go to journalist Augustin Paiukai.
Yes, thank you, Anna. Secretary General, I have a question which many people in Croatia are asking. How is it possible that the drone of 6 tons heavy enters NATO airspace and flies for around an hour and crashes in the capital of a NATO member state while you are so vigilant in defending NATO sky? And do you know something more, whether it really was a drone without a weapon or something? Because the Prime Minister, Minister of Defense, said that there was an explosive device in this flying object that crashed in Zagreb. Thank you.
Well, I spoke with Prime Minister Plenković on Sunday, and we are working together to establish all the facts, but the preliminary indications and information we have is that it was an unarmed drone, and that the drone was off course, and that it ran out fuel and crashed outside Zagreb, or crashed in Croatia. But we will have more confirmed facts soon, but that's the information we have so far. I think also it is important to realize that allies are exchanging information, and that this drone was tracked by the NATO's integrated air and missile defense tracked the flight of the drone that later crashed in Zagreb. But again, we will make sure that the different allies that are involved share all information, and then we can establish all the facts about what this happened. I think, if anything, it demonstrates a need to further strengthen integration, further strengthen information sharing among allies, and also to invest more and upgrade everything from radars to our presence of air and missile defense systems, and that's exactly what we do also by deploying more Patriots in the eastern part of the alliance.
Okay, we'll go to Robert Lupito, Cagliari.
Thank you very much for taking my question. Mr. Secretary General, I want to ask whether there will be a speed-up process for this establishment of the NATO battle group in Romania, and also, since you mentioned about the reset in NATO's defense posture after Russia's invasion into Ukraine, do you think that this reset will also mean an unitary approach both for the northern part of the eastern flank and both for the southern part of the eastern flank? We will see the same level of troops and defense commitment in the Baltics, in Poland, and also in Romania and Bulgaria? Thank you very much.
So we have already increased significantly our presence in the eastern part of the alliance, also in the Black Sea region, with more troops. I went to Romania a couple of weeks ago, and I met with US forces, German forces, and other forces there who have actually increased their presence. And now the lead elements of the NATO response force have been deployed to Romania, French troops, and this demonstrates that there is already a significant increased military presence in the eastern part of the alliance. We speak about 40,000 forces on high readiness and the direct NATO command. Then we have national forces, we have also bilateral arrangements. So in total this is a quite significant presence both in Romania and the southeast of the alliance, but also in the Baltic region. This is our immediate response. And as I said, the battle groups is under establishment with the French-led VJTF element. Then what we will discuss at the Defense Ministerial meeting is not only the immediate response and the need for support to Ukraine, but we will also
the need to reset our presence, our deterrence and defense posture in light of the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the integration of Russian and Belarusian forces. That will take some more time, because I think we need to assess the different options. We need advice from our military commanders, and I expect that the ministers, when they meet tomorrow, will agree will agree to ask our military commanders to provide advice for a more longer-term adaptation. So I think it's important to distinguish clearly about the immediate response, already tens of thousands of more troops, air power and naval power, and then the more long-term adjustment of our posture. There will take some more time before we take final decisions. I expect that to be made at the NATO summit at the end of June.
Thank you very much. This concludes this press conference. We'll see you tomorrow.
Thank you.
Okay, let me see if this key worked. Yeah, it worked. Except I have no visual evidence to show my microphone is on. So I made a shortcut that works no matter what is in front of me, window-wise. But again, we are going to watch from the beginning. And we have to wait a bit because now it's processed, the file that just streamed. So we need to wait a bit and then we can see the beginning because I've missed it. For the Dutch people, I will tell it in Dutch now. In het Nederlands voor jullie. Het begin heb ik dus gemist van NATO. Ik heb nu een betere bron, ook qua geluid. Dat is NATO zelf. In plaats van een restream van de mainstream media die we net zagen. We gaan hem nu even opnieuw starten, want het begin hebben we gemist. Ik ook, dus jullie ook natuurlijk, uiteraard. En ja, gezien de vragen had hij wel het een en ander te melden. Het waren naar mijn idee, of niet naar mijn idee, ik heb nooit zo lang zoveel vragen beantwoord zien worden ook. Dat is een, voor wat ik gezien heb was dit heel lang dus, veel. Nou, dan gaan we eens even dit sluiten. Hij staat nog steeds live, dat zou inhouden dat hij nog niet verwerkt is. CQ nog niet afgezet, dat kan ook nog. Terugspoelen kan niet. Misschien kan ik dat wel instellen. Nee, ook niet. Dan ga ik de hele pagina vernieuwen. Wie weet dat er dan... Kijk, nou staat de play, wie weet. Daaronder zijn allemaal nullen. Dus dat zou betekenen dat hij nog aan het verwerken is. Nu staat er live, maar ja, dat kan de stream zijn die al live was. Ja, dat is het. Ze zitten ook op YouTube. Twee minuten geleden, maar ja, dat is dan gek genoeg copyright. Even kijken hoor. NATO zelf zoek ik. NATO. Dat is raar dat die niet meteen gevonden worden bovenaan. Hun live. Of ze zitten niet op YouTube, dat kan ook nog. Global News is nog aan het uitzenden. Dus die zenden ook het stilstaande beeld uit wat er nu is. Vreemd. Nou, ik zie nu namen die ik eerder ook al zag. Dus dan kan ik alleen nog NATO intypen en dan kanaalnaam, maar ik denk niet dat dat bestaat. Ja, we staan er tegen. De laatste is van 4 dagen geleden. Dus dat is jammer. Schieten we niks meer op. Dan ga ik deze nog een keer geforceerd herladen. Ja. Er zit een tijdlijntje onder. Dat was er net niet. Hij gaat ook weer weg. Dus hij is nog steeds niet uitgezet, die live. Dan staat hier een portal link. Er is een heel andere achtergrond, dus die is het zeker niet. 11 maart is ook al te lang geleden. Nee, daar staat hij nog niet. We moeten even geduld hebben tot hij verwerkt is. ga het nog anders doen. Ogenblikkie. This is not it. That's smart. They smart like in almost clickbait. They have said something live just after this live from NATO stopped with almost the same keywords. So you think, hey, that's it, but it isn't. Perhaps this one is it? Is the one? Yeah, this is the one, I think. Found it.
Response force for the first time for collective. Moscow could...
Image will soon return. Yeah. There it is. Okay. I'll make a new screen capture so it shows a little bit more neat.
Tomorrow at the defining moment for our security. President Putin's brutal invasion of Ukraine is causing death and destruction every day. It has shocked the world and shaken the international order. For months, we have exposed Russia's long list of lies. They claimed they did not plan to invade Ukraine, but they did. They claimed they were withdrawing their troops, but they sent in even more. They claim to be protecting civilians, but they are killing civilians. Now, they are making absurd claims about biological labs and chemical weapons in Ukraine. This is just another lie, and we are concerned that Moscow could stage a false flag operation, possibly including chemical weapons. The Ukrainian people are fighting bravely, defending their homes and their future, and we must support them. Tomorrow we will be joined by the Ukrainian Defense Minister Alexei Reznikov and our other partners Georgia, Finland, Sweden and the European Union. The whole world has condemned this senseless war. NATO allies, the European Union and other countries have introduced unprecedented sanctions on Russia. For many years, NATO allies have trained tens of thousands of Ukrainian troops. Many of them are now fighting on the front lines. Allies have also provided significant quantities of critical equipment, including anti-tank and air defense weapons, drones, ammunition and fuel. This training and equipment is helping Ukraine to defend itself. Ukraine has a fundamental right to self-defense enshrined in the UN Charter, and NATO allies and partners will continue to help Ukraine uphold that right by providing military equipment and financial and humanitarian assistance. NATO's core task is to protect and defend all allies. We have responded to this crisis quickly, activating our defense plans, raising our readiness, and deploying the NATO response force for the first time for collective defense. There are now hundreds of thousands of forces on heightened alert across the alliance. 100,000 US troops in Europe, and around 40,000 troops under direct NATO command, mostly in the eastern part of the alliance. Backed by major air and naval power, as well as air defenses. The US is currently deploying Patriot batteries to Poland, and Germany and the Netherlands are also deploying Patriots to Slovakia. All of this sends an unmistakable message. An attack on one ally will be met with a decisive response from the whole alliance. Russia's invasion of Ukraine and its military integration in Belarus creates a new security reality on the European continent. So we need to reset NATO's military posture for this new reality. Tomorrow, ministers will start an important discussion on concrete measures to reinforce our security for the longer term in all domains. On land, this could include substantially more forces in the eastern part of the alliance at higher readiness and with more pre-positioned equipment. We will also consider major increases to our air and naval deployments, strengthening our integrated air and missile defense, reinforcing our cyber defenses, and holding more and larger exercises. I expect we will task NATO's military commanders to develop options for our Madrid summit in June. Major reinforcements of our defense will require major increases in investment. I welcome that Germany and other allies have already announced they are stepping up, and I encourage all allies to spend a minimum of 2% of GDP on defense. We must do more, so we must also invest more to protect peace and freedom and uphold our values at this critical time. And with that, I'm ready to take your questions.
Okay, we'll start with CNN.
Thank you. I'm wondering whether you can say whether the NATO alliance has seen evidence that China has been providing Russia with any kind of assistance that would help it on the battlefield, whether that's military equipment or MREs, food for troops, anything of that kind. And also with regard to the situation that we saw earlier this week with Russia targeting a military base very close to Poland's border, I'm wondering what you can say about the kind of red lines and whether there would be any kind of consequences if a missile, for example, were accidentally to enter NATO territory or on purpose. Thank you.
So NATO's core responsibility, our main responsibility, is to protect and defend all NATO allies, 1 billion people in 30 different countries, and to ensure that we also do that now in a more dangerous security situation in Europe caused by the invasion of Ukraine by Russia. We have increased the presence in the eastern part of the alliance, we have increased the readiness of our troops, and we are deploying more capabilities, especially to the eastern part of the alliance. So an attack on one ally will trigger the response from the whole alliance, and we are there to protect and defend every inch of NATO allied territory. When we see more military activities, when we see actually fighting going on close to NATO borders, there is always a risk for incidents and accidents. And therefore, we have to make every effort to prevent such incidents and accidents, and if they happen, to make sure that they don't spiral out of control and create really dangerous situations. We are very closely monitoring the airspace and the border areas around NATO. And our military commanders also have the lines to their Russian commanders to help to prevent incidents and accidents and also prevent them from spiraling out of control if they happen. On China, so China should join the rest of the world, condemning strongly the brutal invasion of Ukraine by Russia. And any support to Russia military support, any other type of support will actually help Russia conduct a brutal war against an independent sovereign nation, Ukraine, and help them to continue to wage a war which is causing death, suffering, and an enormous amount of destruction. So China has an obligation as a member of the UN Security Council to actually support and uphold international law, and the Russian invasion of Ukraine is a blatant violation of international law. So we call on Russia to clearly condemn the invasion and, of course, not support Russia, and we are closely monitoring any signs of support from China to Russia.
We'll go to the National News Agency of Ukraine, over there.
Dmitry Shkurko, National News Agency of Ukraine. Secretary General, NATO have a glorious story of supporting some countries and preventing bloodshed, for example, like it happened in Sarajevo, in Kosovo, and so on. What is the threshold for NATO when the Russian killings will overcome that threshold to NATO for direct involvement? And the short follow-up because of that, if you follow the Russian rhetorics, they are not going to stop purely in Ukraine. So that the question is, isn't it the right time for NATO to intervene, to defeat and to break the Putin's military machine while it's still in Ukraine, while waiting when the Russian bombs will be falling to the European capitals? Thank you.
NATO allies have supported Ukraine for many years, and especially since Russia invaded Ukraine for the first time back in 2014. And NATO allies like the United Kingdom, the United States, Canada have also helped to train tens of thousands of Ukrainian forces, special operation forces and other troops. And they are now bravely fighting and resisting the invading Russian forces. And I think this support over many years have proven extremely important in strengthening the Ukrainian armed forces, and the Ukrainian armed forces are much bigger, much stronger, much better equipped, much better trained now than in 2014. And I'm glad that NATO allies have helped to achieve that with the training and with the equipment. Then, of course, it's first and foremost the courage of the Ukrainian armed forces and the Ukrainian people and the Ukrainian political leadership that has actually enabled them to fight back, to slow down, to resist the brutal invasion conducted by the Russian Federation and which is the responsibility of President Putin. And it is President Putin who is responsible for this war. He can end this war now, withdraw all his troops now, and then engage in good faith in a political effort to find a diplomatic solution. So we are calling on President Putin to do exactly that. Then NATO's Ukraine is a highly valued partner which we have supported and continue to support, and allies are also stepping up support, partly with military equipment, partly with financial support, humanitarian support, but also by imposing the sanctions which is forcing, which are actually crippling Russian economy. Our responsibility as an alliance is to protect and defend all allies, and we are sending a clear message that we are ready to do so by increasing the presence in the eastern part of the alliance. But again, it is Russia and President Putin that are responsible for the invasion of Ukraine, and President Putin should end this senseless war by withdrawing its forces from Ukraine.
Okay, Politico.
Thank you.
And President Putin should end.
Why do the US and NATO insist that fighter jets won't be helpful for Ukraine when the Ukrainians themselves say otherwise? Shouldn't it be up to the Ukrainian authorities to say what would be helpful for them? Thank you.
NATO allies are providing many different types of equipment, including advanced air defense systems, which have actually helped the Ukrainians to shoot down Russian planes, Russian missiles, and the allies continue to provide support also when it comes to different types of air defense systems. But I will not go into the details of every type of supply, every type of support, exactly how and where, because I think that will just make it harder and more difficult to continue to provide this type of support. NATO allies are stepping up and providing also advanced air defense systems.
Wall Street Journal.
Thank you. Dan Michaels, Wall Street Journal. To follow up on the earlier question, there have apparently been UAV incursions into NATO airspace. Apparently one Russian drone entered and left Polish airspace, and another one crashed in NATO territory. How do you determine when something like that is an act of aggression or an act that warrants response? And you were talking earlier about escalation. How do you ensure that something like that is handled in a way that is appropriate and doesn't get out of control? Thank you.
Well, I cannot confirm the latest incidents you are referring to, but in general I can say that we are stepping up our vigilance, our presence, the way we monitor our airspace, and including by deploying new Patriot batteries to the eastern part of the alliance. And by doing that, and also through our AWACS surveillance planes and increased air policing, air patrolling, we are both increasing the capabilities we have to monitor, to track, but also to ensure that we are able to react if needed. NATO's integrated air and missile defense tracked the flight path of an object which entered Romanian airspace on Sunday. In response, Romanian fighter aircraft scrambled immediately to investigate, and the Romanian authorities and NATO are reviewing these incidents, as we're also reviewing the incident that ended with the crash of a drone in Croatia. The indications we have so far on the drone that crashed in Croatia outside Zagreb is that that was not an armed attack, not an armed drone, but it just highlights that with more military activities in the air, with drones, with planes, there is a risk for incidents and accidents, and therefore we need to be extremely vigilant. We need to react when needed, and we need to make sure that we have the communications, the line of communications also with the Russians, to prevent incidents from really creating dangerous situations. So that's the reason why we are increasing the presence and also the surveillance and monitoring of the airspace over NATO.
Bloomberg, lady in blue, just behind. No.
Thank you for the question, Natalia Droziak from Bloomberg. I just wanted to follow up on what you said in your introduction about the risk of false flag event and Russia maybe using chemical weapons. How would NATO respond in such a scenario? Is this a red line for potential NATO intervention? Thank you.
Any use of chemical weapons will be a violation of international law, will be a violation of the ban that, or the treaty that bans chemical weapons, and Russia has signed to that convention. We call on Russia not to use chemical weapons. We call on Russia to withdraw all its forces and to stop the fighting, but in particular not to use any chemical weapons. Russia has used chemical agents before to attack and actually kill political opponents. We have also seen that Russia has supported the Assad regime in Syria and helped to facilitate the use of chemical weapons several times in Syria. And any use of chemical weapons is absolutely unacceptable, and therefore it is also extremely important that Russia understands that it is unacceptable if they consider any use of chemical weapons, and we are also very vigilant about the possibility of them trying to stage some kind of pretext false flag operation to provide an excuse for any type of use of chemical weapons.
Okay, we'll go to NPR, Deutsche Welle, lady in pink.
Thank you very much. Just somewhat of a follow-up on Natalia's question. She was asking whether what NATO would do and whether this changes your red lines. So as you say that you are looking at NATO's military posture again, is this something that you would consider changing? You have said that this would be a war crime, and we know that simply warning Russia against doing something is not enough of a deterrent to stop it. So if NATO knows, or if NATO sees that a chemical attack could take place and you say that's a war crime, would NATO consider changing the fact that it would not intervene in case of such a threat? Thank you.
Our main responsibility is to protect and defend all NATO allies. It is important that Russia understands that we are there to do exactly that. We have conveyed a very clear message to Russia about that we also see when they try to stage pretexts for the use of chemical weapons. We have seen that they, throughout this crisis, have tried to create different kinds of false flag operations to try to provide excuses for the use of force. We saw that in the lead-up to the intervention, and now we have seen them accusing Ukraine and also NATO allies developing chemical weapons. And that's an absolute lie, and therefore it also makes us a bit concerned about the possibility that they are actually planning to do that. The President of the United States and other allies also made it very clear that if they use chemical weapons, there will be a high price to pay. But I will not speculate about any military response from the NATO side, except for saying very clearly that NATO's main responsibility is to make sure that we defend and protect all allies.
DPA, gentleman in white, just behind, yeah. No, okay. Frankfurt Allgemeine Zeitung.
Thomas Kutschka, Frankfurt Allgemeine Zeitung. Secretary General, after the demise of the INF Treaty, it's been NATO's position that the Russian deployment of SSC-8 will not be reciprocated by the deployment of medium or intermediate nuclear-capable missile systems. In the light of the Russian aggression against Ukraine and President Putin's threats, nuclear threats to NATO, in your view, does this stance need to be reviewed?
The demise of the INF Treaty was a serious setback for international arms control, because the INF Treaty, agreed in 1987, banned all intermediate-range weapon systems. Then, over the last years, over actually several years, we have seen that Russia has deployed a new missile, which violates this treaty, and then that led to the demise of the treaty a few years ago. We have stated from the NATO, and Russia has deployed these weapons over now several years, the SSC-8. We have made it clear that we will not mirror what Russia does. So we have no plans to deploy nuclear-capable intermediate-range land-based systems in Europe. At the same time, we need to be able to make sure that we are able to respond and protect all allies, also in a new security environment where Russia has deployed more nuclear-capable missiles. And therefore, we have to do many things at the same time. We need to strengthen our air and missile defense. We are doing that. We need to invest more in advanced conventional capabilities, including fifth-generation aircraft. And I welcome the German decision to invest in fifth-generation aircraft. We need also to increase the readiness and our ability to monitor, detect, and of course we also need to make sure that NATO's nuclear deterrent remain safe and secure and effective. And that's exactly what we're doing when we are now making sure that we exercise and ensure the effectiveness of our nuclear deterrent.
Okay, we have Associated Press.
Hi, Mark from Associated Press. Mr. Secretary General, what do you know about the 3 European leaders visiting Ukraine today?
NATO allies and the European leaders have had extensive contacts with Ukraine and the political leadership in Ukraine, including with President Zelensky throughout the whole crisis and also to lead up to the crisis. I think it's important that leaders of NATO countries, of European member states, are engaging closely with President Zelensky. We will have the defense minister of Ukraine attending the NATO defense ministerial tomorrow by video link, and therefore I think it's important that we, at all levels, in different formats, engage and meet with the Ukrainian political leadership.
Interfax.
Thank you, Interfax Ukraine, Irina Sommer. This morning, some mass media spread information about possible extraordinary summit, NATO summit, next week. Can you please confirm this? And second, technical question. According to my information, it took for NATO bureaucracy 1.5 weeks to implement Ukrainian request for fuel. Can you please comment on this too? Thank you.
Well, NATO allies are providing and have provided a lot of different types of support to Ukraine. Some of this is channeled through the NATO framework. Some are provided bilaterally. And for us, it is important that we provide support on short notice and that we provide critical support which Ukraine needs. Overall, I think the message is that over many years, leading up to invasion, but also after invasion, allies have been very quick in stepping up and providing support. And again, I'm a bit reluctant to go into all the details about exactly how and where and when, but the overall picture is that allies are providing significant support, and they have done so on short notice, and that's different types of weapons, but also that includes fuel. Well, NATO allies have consulted and coordinated closely over several weeks, both in the lead up to the invasion, but also after the invasion. We had a virtual summit just one day after, and we will have different ministerial meetings, also extraordinary ministerial meetings, and we will have an extraordinary defense ministerial meeting tomorrow. Then we are able to convene also a NATO summit with all the NATO leaders on short notice, but I cannot go into more details about that now.
Okay, we'll take a couple of questions online. We'll go to Jutarnyi list, Augustin Pajokai.
Yes, thank you, Anna. Secretary General, I have a question which many people in Croatia are asking. How is it possible that a drone of 6 tons heavy enters NATO airspace and flies for around an hour and crashed in the capital of a NATO member state, while you are so vigilant in defending NATO sky? And do you know something more, whether it really was a drone without a weapon or something? Because the Prime Minister and Minister of Defense said that there was an explosive device in this flying object that crashed in Zagreb. Thank you.
Well, I spoke with Prime Minister Plenković on Sunday, and we are working together to establish all the facts, but the preliminary indications and information we have is that this was an unarmed drone and that the drone was off course, and that it ran out of fuel and crashed outside Zagreb, or crashed in Croatia. But we will have more confirmed facts soon, but that's the information we have so far. I think also it is important to realize that allies are exchanging information, and that this drone was tracked by the NATO's integrated air and missile defense tracked the flight of the drone that later crashed in Zagreb. But again, we will make sure that the different allies that were involved share all the information, and then we can establish all the facts about what this happened. I think, if anything, it demonstrates the need to further strengthen integration, further strengthen information sharing among allies, and also to invest more and upgrade everything from radars to our presence of air and missile defense systems, and that's exactly what we do also by deploying more Patriots in the eastern part of the alliance.
Okay, we'll go to Robert Lupitu, Calea Europeană.
Thank you very much for taking my question. Mr. Secretary General, I want to ask you whether there will be a speed-up process for this establishment of the NATO battle group in Romania, and also, since you mentioned about a reset in NATO's defense posture after Russia's invasion into Ukraine, do you think that this reset will also mean a unitary approach both for the northern part of the eastern flank and both for the southern part of the eastern flank? We will see the same level of troops and defense commitment in the Baltics, in Poland, and also in Romania and Bulgaria? Thank you very much.
So we have already increased significantly our presence in the eastern part of the alliance, also in the Black Sea region, with more troops. I went to Romania a couple of weeks ago, and I met with US forces, German forces, and other forces there who have actually increased their presence. And now the lead elements of the NATO response force have been deployed to Romania, French troops. And this demonstrates that there is already a significant increased military presence in the eastern part of the alliance. We speak about 40,000 forces on high readiness and the direct NATO command. Then we have the national forces. We have also bilateral arrangements. So in total, this is a quite significant presence both in Romania and the southeast of the alliance, but also in the Baltic region. This is our immediate response. And as I said, the battle groups is under establishment with the French-led VJTF element. Then what we will discuss at the Defense Ministerial meeting is not only the immediate response and the need for support to Ukraine, but we will also look at the need to reset our presence, our deterrence and defense posture in light of the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the integration of Russian and Belarusian forces. That will take some more time, because I think we need to assess the different options. We need advice from our military commanders, and I expect that the ministers, when they meet tomorrow, will agree to ask our military commanders to provide advice for the more longer-term adaptation. So I think it's important to distinguish clearly about the immediate response, already tens of thousands of more troops, air power and naval power, and then the more long-term adjustment of our posture. There will take some more time before we take final decisions. I expect that to be made at the NATO summit at the end of June.
Thank you very much. This concludes this press conference. We'll see you tomorrow.
Thank you. I welcome that Germany humanitarian assistance. They did not plan to moment for our security. President Putin's brutal invasion of Ukraine is causing death and destruction every day. It has shocked the world and shaken the international order. For months, we have exposed Russia's long list of lies. They claimed they did not plan to invade Ukraine, but they did. They claimed they were withdrawing their troops, but they sent in even more. They claim to be protecting civilians, but they are killing civilians. Now, they are making absurd claims about biological labs and chemical weapons in Ukraine. This is just another lie, and we are concerned that Moscow could stage a false flag operation, possibly including chemical weapons. The Ukrainian people are fighting bravely, defending their homes and their future, and we must support them. Tomorrow we will be joined by the Ukrainian Defense Minister Alexei Reznikov and our other partners Georgia, Finland, Sweden and the European Union. The whole world has condemned this senseless war. NATO allies, the European Union and other countries have introduced unprecedented sanctions on Russia. For many years, NATO allies have trained tens of thousands of Ukrainian troops. Many of them are now fighting on the front lines. Allies have also provided significant quantities of critical equipment, including anti-tank and air defense weapons, drones, ammunition and fuel. This training and equipment is helping Ukraine to defend itself. Ukraine has a fundamental right to self-defense enshrined in the UN Charter, and NATO allies and partners will continue to help Ukraine uphold that right by providing military equipment and financial and humanitarian assistance. NATO's core task is to protect and defend all allies. We have responded to this crisis quickly, activating our defense plans, raising our readiness, and deploying the NATO response force for the first time for collective defense. There are now hundreds of thousands of forces on heightened alert across the alliance. 100,000 US troops in Europe, and around 40,000 troops under direct NATO command, mostly in the eastern part of the alliance. Backed by major air and naval power, as well as air defenses. The US is currently deploying Patriot batteries to Poland, and Germany and the Netherlands are also deploying Patriots to Slovakia. All of this sends an unmistakable message. An attack on one ally will be met with a decisive response from the whole alliance. Russia's invasion of Ukraine and its military integration in Belarus creates a new security reality on the European continent. So we need to reset NATO's military posture for this new reality. Tomorrow, ministers will start an important discussion on concrete measures to reinforce our security for the longer term in all domains. On land, this could include substantially more forces in the eastern part of the alliance at higher readiness and with more pre-positioned equipment. We will also consider major increases to our air and naval deployments, strengthening our integrated air and missile defense, reinforcing our cyber defenses, and holding more and larger exercises. I expect we will task NATO's military commanders to develop options for our Madrid summit in June. Major reinforcements of our defense will require major increases in investment. I welcome that Germany and other allies have already announced they are stepping up. And I encourage all allies to spend a minimum of 2% of GDP on defense. We must do more, so we must also invest more to protect peace and freedom and uphold our values at this critical time. And with that, I'm ready to take your questions.
Okay, we'll start with CNN.
Thank you. I'm wondering whether you can say whether the NATO alliance has seen evidence that China has been providing Russia with any kind of assistance that would help it on the battlefield, whether that's military equipment or MREs, food for troops, anything of that kind. And also with regard to the situation that we saw earlier this week with Russia targeting a military base very close to Poland's border, I'm wondering what you can say about the kind of red lines and whether there would be any kind of consequences if a missile, for example, were accidentally to enter NATO territory or on purpose. Thank you.
So NATO's core responsibility, our main responsibility, is to protect and defend all NATO allies, 1 billion people in 30 different countries, and to ensure that we also do that now in a more dangerous security situation in Europe caused by the invasion of Ukraine by Russia. We have increased the presence in the eastern part of the alliance, we have increased the readiness of our troops, and we are deploying more capabilities, especially to the eastern part of the alliance. So an attack on one ally will trigger a response from the whole alliance, and we are there to protect and defend every inch of NATO allied territory. When we see more military activities, when we see actually fighting going on close to NATO borders, there is always a risk for incidents and accidents. And therefore we have to make every effort to prevent such incidents and accidents, and if they happen, to make sure that they don't spiral out of control and create really dangerous situations. We are very closely monitoring the airspace and the border areas around NATO, and our military commanders also have the lines to their Russian commanders to help to prevent incidents and accidents, and also prevent them from spiraling out of control if they happen. On China, so China should join the rest.
The underdog. We believe that when a cause is just and right, it will always prevail, no matter the size of the opponent. This doesn't mean it'll be easy. Ukrainians are already paying incalculable human costs. This illegal and unnecessary war is a grave mistake, and Putin must stop it now. Le mépris.
Vladimir Putin's blatant disregard for human life is absolutely unacceptable. Canada continues to demand that Russia stop targeting civilians and end this unjustifiable war.
Ukrainians are standing up to authoritarianism. And as parliamentarians united in this House today, and all Canadians, we stand with you. As friends, you can count on our unwavering and steadfast support. And now, it is my great privilege to introduce to you all the President of Ukraine, our friend, Volodymyr Zelensky.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Speaker, Prime Minister, dear Justin, members of the government, members of the parliament, all distinguished guests, friends. Before I begin, I would like you to understand my feelings and feelings of all Ukrainians, as far as it is possible. Our feelings over the last 20 days. 20 days of a full-scale aggression of Russian Federation after 8 years of fightings in Donbass region. Can you only imagine? Imagine that on 4 a.m., each of you start hearing bomb explosions, severe explosion. Justin, can you imagine hearing your children hear all these severe explosions, bombing of airport, bombing of Ottawa airport, tens of other cities of your wonderful country. Can you imagine that? Cruise missiles are falling down on your terrain, and your children are asking you what happened, and you are receiving the first news which infrastructure objects have been bombed and destroyed by Russian Federation. And you know how many people already died. Can you only imagine what words, how can you explain to your children that you just, full-scale aggression just happened in your country? You know that this is war to annihilate your state, your country. You know that this is the war to subjugate your people. And on second day, you receive notifications that huge columns of military equipment are entering your country, crossing the border. They're entering small cities. They are giving siege. They're encircling cities. And they start to shell civil neighborhoods. They bomb school buildings. They destroyed kindergarten facilities, like in our city, city of Sumy, like in city of Ochtyrka. Imagine that someone is taking siege, laying siege to Vancouver. Can you just imagine that for a second? And all these people who are left in such city. And this is exactly the situation that our city of Mariupol is suffering right now. And they are left without heat or hydro, or without means of communicating, almost without food, without water, seeking shelter in bomb shelters. Dear Justin, dear guests, can you imagine that every day you receive memorandums about the number of casualties, including among women and children? You've heard about the bombings. Currently, we have 97 children that died during this war. Can you imagine famous CN Tower in Toronto? If it was hit by Russian bombs. Of course, I don't wish this on anyone, but this is our reality in which we live. We have to contemplate, we have to see where the next bombing will take place. Your Churchill Square, we have a Freedom Square in the city of Kharkiv. Our Babin Yar, the place where victims of Holocaust were buried, and it has been bombed by the Russians. Imagine that Canadian facilities have been bombed, similarly as our buildings and memorial places are being bombed. A number of families have died. Every night is a horrible night. Russians are shelling from all kinds of artillery, from tanks. They're hitting civilian infrastructure. They're hitting big buildings. Can you imagine that there is a fire starting at a nuclear power plant, and that's exactly what happened in our country. Each city that they are marching through, they are taking down Ukrainian flags. Can you imagine someone taking down your Canadian flags in Montreal and other Canadian cities? I know that you all support Ukraine. We've been friends with you, Justin, but also I would like you to understand, and I would like you to feel this, what we feel every day. We want to live, and we want to be victorious. We want to prevail for the sake of life. Can you imagine when you call your friends, your friendly nation, and you ask, please close the sky, close the airspace, please stop the bombing. How many more cruise missiles have to fall on our cities until you make this happen? And they, in return, they express their deep concerns about the situation. When we talk with our partners, and they say, please hold on a little longer. Some people are talking about trying to avoid the escalation. And at the same time, in response to our aspiration to become members of NATO, we also do not hear a clear answer. Sometimes we don't see obvious things. It's a dire straits, but it also allowed us to see who our real friends are over the last 20 days, and as well 8 previous years. I'm sure that you've been able to see clearly what's going on, and I'm addressing all of you. Canada has always been steadfast in their support. You've been a reliable partner to Ukraine and Ukrainians, and I'm sure this will continue. You've offered your help, your assistance at our earliest request. You supply us with the military assistance, with humanitarian assistance. You've imposed serious sanctions. At the same time, we see that, unfortunately, they did not bring the end to the war. You can see that our cities like Kharkiv, Mariupol, and many other cities are not protected just like your cities are protected. Edmonton, Vancouver. You can see that Kyiv is being shelled and bombed. City of Ivano-Frankivsk. It used to be, we were a very peaceful country, peaceful cities, but now they're being constantly bombarded. Basically, what I'm trying to say that you all need to do more to stop Russia, to protect Ukraine, and by doing that, to protect Europe from Russian threat. They're destroying everything, memorial complexes, schools, hospitals, housing complex. They already killed 97 Ukrainian children. We are not asking for much. We're asking for justice, for real support, which will help us to prevail, to defend, to save life all of the world. Canada is leading in these efforts, and I'm hoping that other countries will follow the same suit. We're asking for more of your leadership, and please take greater part in these efforts, Justin and all of our friends of Ukraine, all friends of the truth. Please understand how important it is for us to close our airspace from Russian missiles and Russian aircrafts. I hope you can understand. I hope you can increase your efforts. You can increase sanctions so they will not have a single dollar to fund their war effort. Commercial entities should not be working in Russia. Probably you know better than many in any other countries that this attack on Ukraine, it's their attempt to annihilate Ukrainian people, and there is nothing else to it. This is their main objective. It's actually the war against Ukrainian people. And it's an attempt to destroy everything that we as Ukrainians do. It's an attempt to destroy our future, to destroy our nation, our character. You Canadians, you know very well all this. That's why I'm asking you, please do not stop in your efforts. Please expand your efforts to bring back peace in our peaceful country. I believe, and I know that you can do it. And we are part of the anti-war coalition, and jointly I'm sure that we'll achieve results. I would like to also ask our Ukrainian diaspora in Canada. This is a historical moment, and we need your support, your practical support. And we hope that with your practical steps, you will show that you are part of the modern Ukrainian history. Please remember, this is a practical, modern-day history of Ukraine. We want to live. We want to have peace. I'm grateful to every one of you in the Parliament of Canada who is present there, to every Canadian citizen. I am very grateful to you, Justin. I am grateful to Canadian people, and I am confident that together we will overcome and will be victorious. Glory to Ukraine. Thank you to Canada.
Thank you, Mr. President. I now invite the Honourable George Fury, Speaker of the Senate, to say a few words.
President Zelensky, Prime Minister Trudeau, Chief Justice Wagner, Speaker Rhoda, fellow parliamentarians, distinguished guests, Mesdames et Messieurs. Monsieur le Président.
Mr. President, it is a great honor and privilege for me to thank you for your very powerful and inspiring words.
On behalf of all senators, members of the House of Commons, and indeed on behalf of all Canadians, it is my honor and privilege to thank you for your very powerful and inspiring words today. Please know, Mr. President, that Canadians stand with you. We know what is at stake. You are battling for your people, for your country, and for all of us who believe in peace and democracy, in truth and justice. For all of us who stand against tyranny, lies, and the horrific war crimes that have been committed against the Ukrainian people. There is a word in the Bible, one word, that expresses so much of the courage that you, Mr. President, and your fellow Ukrainians are showing the world. In the original Hebrew, the word is hineni. Literally, it means, here I stand. It was said by the great Old Testament leaders when called upon to lead their people. It is a statement of stepping up to leadership in the face of overwhelming odds. It is clearly what you are saying, Mr. President, by your actions, and what all Ukrainians are saying in this terrible time of crisis. The world is witnessing a Ukraine united more than ever in common cause to secure its place among the family of nations. As Prime Minister Trudeau has made clear by his words and actions, Canada stands with you. I know I speak on behalf of all Canadians when I express our admiration for the leadership and courage you have demonstrated as the Ukrainian people struggle to repel a brutal and illegal invasion. You have shown the world that Ukraine will not cower, will not falter, and will not be defeated. The heart and soul of Ukraine are strong. Canada recognizes your fortitude, your resilience, and your strength of purpose. Canada stands with Ukraine and her many allies in the pursuit of a swift and peaceful resolution to this conflict. This resolve rests upon our shared commitment to democracy, to human rights, and to the sovereign equality of all nations. For Canadians, Ukraine is permanently woven into the fabric of our culture. Ukraine, simply put, is family. Mr. President, to you and the people of Ukraine, please be assured of our solidarity in the days and weeks ahead. Merci, Monsieur le Président, pour votre...
Thank you, Mr. President, for your great strength and your great courage.
Thank you once again for your courage and determination in the face of this horrific onslaught, and for your inspiring words to Canada and indeed to the world today. Slava Ukraini.
Thank you, Speaker Fury. Monsieur le Président.
Mr. President, most of us can only imagine the hardship, the sorrow, and the fear that the people of Ukraine are enduring as their nation is attacked and their very existence is threatened.
The extraordinary courage and defiance that Ukrainians are demonstrating in defending their country and their way of life is an example to all freedom-loving people. And it is clear that many of our fellow citizens are drawing strength from your own determination to repel the invaders and protect your homeland. You are not just the president anymore. You have proven to be a great leader of your nation. As Ukraine continues to fight for its freedom, please know that you are not alone and that you will not be left behind. We will be there with you. We may be distant cousins in terms of geography, but Ukraine is woven into the very fabric of Canadian society, thanks to more than 1 million Canadians of Ukrainian descent. In an interview you gave 2 years ago, you said, and I quote, "We must remember the heroes of today, heroes of the arts, heroes of literature, simply heroes of Ukraine. Why don't we use their names, the names of the heroes that today unite Ukraine?" To the people of Ukraine, to your friends in Canada and around the world, you, Volodymyr Zelensky, are one of those heroes. Heroyam Slava. Au nom de tous les parlementaires.
On behalf of all parliamentarians, thank you for having addressed the people of Canada and for showing us the true meaning of courage, freedom, and patriotism. May we prove worthy of the friendship between our people and our countries.
Slava Ukraini. Merci. Merci. Thank you. Дякую. I now invite the Honourable Candice Bergen, Interim Leader of the Official Opposition, to address us.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I would like to begin by first and foremost stating on behalf of my Conservative caucus our complete admiration and respect for the people and the nation of Ukraine. And to President Zelensky, let me express to you how much I admire your courage and your sacrificial leadership at this critical time in Ukraine's history. The kind of leadership that you are showing, sir, is very rare, and it serves as an inspiration to all of us who are elected. You are the leader of Ukraine for such a time as this, and we remain indebted to you. Monsieur le Président Zelensky.
President Zelensky, thank you for your leadership in this war against your country and your defense of democracy. The official opposition stands with Ukraine. It is our duty. We will also be there after this conflict in order to help you rebuild Ukraine. Your courage inspires us.
The images that we are seeing from Ukraine, as you described them, President, are heartbreaking and painful. Families huddled in bomb shelters, the ruins of a children's hospital and a maternity ward, the elderly who are trying to find their way to safety. But there is also inspiration as we watch ordinary people, men and women of all ages, defending their homeland. We are witnesses to the strength and the defiance of Ukrainians standing up for their freedom, their independence, and their sovereignty. Ukrainians aren't just fighting to defend themselves. Let's be very clear. They are defending all of Europe, because Putin's brutal attack on Ukraine is an attack on all of us. That's the lesson history has taught us, and one we cannot ignore. And it is why we must help the people of Ukraine in every way possible. Canada has the largest number of people of Ukraine descent outside of Ukraine and Russia. For a century, they have enriched our communities and our culture, especially in the Canadian prairies, which is where I am from. Canada, and Manitoba in particular, share ties with Ukraine that cannot be broken. And now, almost 1.4 million Ukrainian Canadians are watching what is happening. Their hearts and their souls are reaching out, hoping, praying for the nation and the people of their forebears. This war of naked aggression has revealed Vladimir Putin for what he really is, a warmonger and a violent predator with no regard for human life and suffering. He has crossed lines that after 2 world wars we thought would never be crossed, and he's shaken the rule-based order that has kept millions safe since 1945. Every day, he tells the world lies, and then he proceeds to kill innocent and vulnerable Ukrainians, including women and children. And while on his rampage, he continues to threaten the world, saying if he doesn't get his way, he will use the worst extremes possible. It's sickening to watch. Putin must be brought to justice. He must be held to account for his crimes against humanity at the International Criminal Court at The Hague. This is not just a war against Ukraine, it is a war against the free democratic world. We must stand with Ukraine. It is not a choice, it is a moral duty. Canada was the first country to recognize Ukraine's independence from the Soviet Union. Now it's time to honor that legacy. We must do more, together with our allies, to secure Ukraine's airspace. We need to protect at a minimum the airspace over the humanitarian corridors so that Ukrainians can seek safe passage away from the war zones and to allow humanitarian relief to reach those areas under siege. Canada must do whatever it can to cut through any red tape and welcome Ukrainians who are fleeing, although we all know that what Ukrainians want most is to be able to live in their home nation free, sovereign, and peaceful. President Zelensky, I want to reassure you that Canada will be a safe haven for Ukraine citizens who choose to come here until the battle is over. While they are in Canada, we will cherish them, care for them, provide for them purpose and hope, and when it is time, they will return to their beloved Ukraine and their families. This is our pledge to you. Ukraine, let me conclude by saying simply, Canadians support you today as you face Putin and his reckless empire building. Conservatives stand shoulder to shoulder with Ukraine, and we will continue to support you when this terrible conflict finally ends and you rebuild your homes and communities. Your courage and faith and your fortitude in the face of adversity are an inspiration to all of us. Slava Ukraini, glory to Ukraine, glory to the heroes. Keep fighting, keep believing, keep hoping. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bergen. J'invite maintenant le chef du...
I now ask the leader of the Bloc Québécois, Mr. Yves-François Blanchet, to take the floor. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Esteemed colleagues, Mr. Speaker, and especially Mr. President, it is difficult for me today to express myself in simple words that cannot carry or express all the sadness, all the indignation, or the anger roused by the dirty war inflicted on your great nation, on your great people. It is difficult for me to admit to a certain powerlessness as well, a powerlessness to do much more than express our compassion, our desire, which is only a shadow of yours, to wake us all up from this nightmare that inhabits our screens on a daily basis. Of course, the Quebec nation, it is safe to say, I believe, is massively behind you, massively behind your people. Of course, we have asked and support the will that Canada act in the only valid way, in concert with the free countries of this world and with major international organizations, whether economic, military, or humanitarian. Of course, we also call for ever more severe economic sanctions. This, so that it is from within Russia itself, through balanced negotiations, that this senseless aggression will come to an end. We strongly urge the Canadian government to ease the obstacles to welcoming refugees from Ukraine. In Quebec and in Canada, there are people, there are families, there's the diaspora that wishes to welcome these refugees. We also need a humanitarian bridge between your territory and ours. It is with dismay that we have also heard your call for more weapons. You are entitled to them. You need them. The Quebec nation is peaceful. The Ukrainian nation is peaceful. I am convinced that it is with reluctance that you have asked for these weapons. Your people have the right to defend those they love. They have the right to defend this land that is theirs. So yes, Mr. President, let's arm the Ukrainians rapidly and more significantly.
Monsieur le Président.
Mr. President, all this is still too little. Too little every time a man, a woman, or a child dies, every time a hospital, a daycare centre, a school, a park, or even a single flower is destroyed. Every time, Mr. President, every time we are told that we have done too little, and in a way, we've done it too late. I would like to believe, Mr. President, that we must distinguish between the people and those who lead them. I would like to believe that the Russian people are the first victims of the Kremlin's dictator. But there are leaders of various kinds who do speak for their people, and there is no doubt that you are one. You have turned one of the enemy's worst weapons against itself, the powerful, the vicious, the petty machine of deception and disinformation of the Kremlin wanted to impose the false narrative of a history rewritten by the dictator for his own benefit and for his own personal glory. On the contrary, through simplicity, through frankness, through courage, you have touched the whole world. You kept the eyes of the world upon your people, and in doing so you were able to, and you still have to insist upon, obtaining help that perhaps would have otherwise escaped you. You see, Mr. President, what we cannot do is the cruelest thing of all. Live through this despicable war in dark basements, shaken by the tremors of bombs dropped on your towns and on your villages. Fear for those you love. Doubt in the future. Dread regarding a reconstruction that will last at least a generation. Fear itself. Against the fear in the hearts of Ukraine's children, we can only do too little. I apologize for that. Your enemy, Mr. President, has neither the heart, nor the strength, nor the courage, nor the dignity to overcome the bravery of the Ukrainian people. Mr. President Zelensky, you will win. Freedom will be restored to you. And, in its modest way, Quebec will celebrate with Ukraine.
Merci.
Merci, Monsieur Blanchet.
Thank you, Mr. Blanchet.
The leader of the New Democratic Party. Mr. Jagmeet Singh to speak to us.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank President Zelensky. We heard his words today. We want to thank him for his courage, his inspiration, his resilience. We want to thank the people of Ukraine for their courage and their resilience. He asked us to imagine what it's like to wake up 4 in the morning to bombing. He asked us to imagine what it's like to explain to children. What does it mean? What is going on? Why are we being bombed? Why are we being attacked? He asked us to imagine what it would be like to lose 97 children to a war. He asked us to imagine if major cities in our country, major cities and major places that we think about Montreal and Ottawa, our capital city, Toronto, Vancouver. He asked us to imagine what it would be like if tanks rolled into these cities. What would it be like to see bombs fall on our homes and our cities and our communities, on schools, on hospitals? He asked us to imagine that, and frankly, we can't imagine that. Sitting in Canada, it is unimaginable. But we've seen the horrors unfolding in Ukraine. We've heard the words of President Zelensky. We have spoken with Ukrainian Canadians who share with us the pain that they're experiencing right now, not knowing if their loved ones are going to survive the night. We've heard from families that call constantly asking, are you okay? Are you still alive? It is unimaginable for us. And he asked us, imagine what it's like and please help. He asked for more help. He acknowledged that so far Canada has been a strong ally, but he asked for more help. And we must answer that call. Canadians stand with Ukraine and will answer that call to provide as much help as possible in this time. Canadians want to do more. And we heard from President Zelensky that sanctions are important and we want to increase that. We know that one of the most important things we can do, we know that Putin does not care. President Putin does not care about the people. He does not care about his country, but he does care about his wealth. And we know the way to attack Putin, the way to make sure that he feels the pressure of the sanctions is to target him where it counts, and that is to target the wealth that is held by his allies and oligarchs. And so we are on that path, and we need to continue to apply the most severe of sanctions possible to target specifically President Putin and his wealth. And we know that we can provide humanitarian help. Canada has done its part and needs to continue to do that. We need to welcome Ukrainians that are fleeing this crisis, that are seeking refuge. We need to provide humanitarian help on the ground. We need to continue to provide that support. President Zelensky
has asked us if we can imagine the horrors of this war. He's asked us if we can imagine if the same war were to happen here in Canada. And this is something that is unfathomable to us. He asked that we increase assistance, and we must do so to Ukraine. We must increase sanctions, and we must meet the needs of Ukrainians, and we will do so.
I think about the words that we've heard from President Zelensky, the speeches that he's given, and I think about the moments of courage that we've seen reported from everyday Ukrainians standing up to this violence, standing up to this flagrant aggression of President Putin, something that we clearly and firmly denounce. When we see in those moments, we see incredible courage. I struggle to find the words to describe it. And I think about something my mom always taught me, this phrase in Punjabi. It's chardi kala. And I always misunderstood what it meant. She says it means rising spirits. And she always said it's rising spirits in the face of difficult odds. And I can't think of a moment.
You know, it's so weird. Perhaps they are even scripting the child. Many people are watching this and worldwide. So who knows, it's not by accident.
Ukrainians are saying we will not back down, we will not give up, and we are so incredibly inspired by them for their fight for democracy, for their fight for freedom, and we stand in full solidarity. We wish their Chardikla, their rising spirits, their defiant optimism to continue, and we will be with you every step of the way. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Singh. I now invite the House Leader of the Green Party, Ms. Elizabeth May, to say a few words.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, President Zelensky. What an honor for me to take the floor in this extraordinary and historical moment. And for all of my dear colleagues. The Green Party is part of a grand green family in many countries of this world. A few days ago, I received the following letter sent by the president of Ukraine's Green Party, Vitaly Kononov, and I quote,
Dear Green friends, we are writing to you from bomb shelters, from our home Ukraine, which is mercilessly attacked and bombarded by Russian forces since that fateful day, February 24, 2022. Ukrainians are indiscriminately hit. Collateral damage amounts to total destruction of cities, many civil and social infrastructures that have no relevance to the military are destroyed. Thousands of civilians dead and injured. Millions are fleeing their homes. Ukrainian army and civil defense volunteers have taken up arms and are fighting for the survival of Ukraine. They are successful to a great extent, but missile and bomb attacks by air are causing greatest damage. We are helpless. We have no weapons to counter air attacks. We appeal to you for support. Please urge your governments to help protect our sky by having a no-fly zone. For the sake of world peace and security, for democracy and resolution of conflicts through peaceful means and a rules-based world order, please help Ukraine. Now, it broke my heart to write our dear colleague in Ukraine that all elected Greens around the world have come to the same conclusion, that a no-fly zone will risk a wider war and even a nuclear war. We know these reasons are solid, even though they ring hollow. But we must use every tool, and I fear that the tools we have in front of us are inadequate to the task. President Zelensky, we do not want to let you down. We fear that we may inevitably let you down, but we will find every tool we can find, and where there aren't adequate tools, by God, let's invent them. In 1956, in the Suez Crisis, in the crisis in Suez in 1956, not yet Prime Minister, but Lester B. Pearson, a Canadian. We love ourselves here in Canada, we do. But we are an insignificant country in the massive geopolitics of superpowers, but we sometimes get good ideas. Lester B. Pearson invented UN peacekeepers. We need to invent something now that's effective to stop the war, to stop Putin, to save Ukraine. We have to use every single idea, every single sinew, every muscle. We must not relent for one single second. We have seen illegal wars. I've lived long enough to see many illegal wars based on lies in Vietnam, in Afghanistan, and Iraq. Too many innocent lives lost, and now never again. Not one more Ukrainian child. Please, God, stop the bombs. Please, let's have a ceasefire. Please leave a pathway for Vladimir Putin to make it to a negotiating table and find a peace. How do we stop lies? We stop them with the truth. And the truth is the courage of the Ukrainian people. The truth is the courage and the unexpected reality of you, President Zelensky. An honest-to-God Democrat, a human being, a mensch, a man of such moral courage that the world is inspired. But we must not let you down, because God knows you won't let us down. We must do more. We know this. You are, as our Prime Minister just said, a champion of democracy. May we be worthy to stand by you. May we find the ways that make it meaningful that we stand with you. Not one more lost life, please, God. Not one more mother in Russia who weeps for a lost son in an immoral and illegal war. Thank the brave Russians who face jail just to go on the streets and say, stop the bombing, no more war. And I close with this. President Zelensky, what I want, what I pray, and I pray for you constantly, and for Ukraine. What I want is that you come here in person, that we invite you and we see you here, president of a country at peace, of a free, democratic, and victorious Ukraine. Please come here so that we can hope that in your eyes we remain worthy to be called your friend. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. May. J'aimerais remercier.
Once again, I would like to thank His Excellency President Zelensky for having addressed this House. I know that we will remember this exceptional man for a very long time.
Thank all parliamentarians and all our distinguished guests for having attended, either in person or by video link. This historic joint address to Parliament will continue to be that, a historic event. Merci. Thank you. Yakuku. Thank you.
Our next guest is one of the founders of Airbnb.
यूक्रेन रशिया वॉर अपडेट। अभी दुनिया के सबसे
And 9 humanitarian corridors have opened across Ukraine, providing another chance for civilians in some areas to escape. The total number of refugees who have fled Ukraine so far is now nearing 3 million. Victor Kendo is just outside Warsaw, Poland, with the latest. Victor, Poland has received more than half of these refugees. So what's it like there now with even more refugees coming in?
Diane, we are just outside of this expo center, which has been converted into a massive shelter. You can see that there are some Ukrainian refugees outside here. The majority of them are women and children. Inside, there are thousands more. It is simply overwhelming. We just walked inside for a moment, and the first thing we were told was that there is a glaring lack of volunteers. There is an incredibly long line for food, and there were just 3 people there doing what they can to try to feed as many people as possible. Yesterday alone, some 72,000 refugees crossed the border from Ukraine into Poland, which now brings the total here. It is approaching 2 million in Poland alone. So we were just outside of Warsaw. That's where the majority of the refugees have come in this country. 300,000 plus here in Warsaw alone. The population increasing by 20% in less than 3 weeks. It is creating a massive strain on the system here. Warsaw's mayor has been asking for help. That can't come soon enough. We also just learned this from the United Nations. More than 304,000 people have gone to other European countries. Some other cities are starting to reach their limits as well, including Berlin, where the mayor there says that 15,000 refugees are arriving every single day.
And we heard there in Ian's piece, the residents of Mariupol have had little access to power over the past week. Food and water supplies are diminishing. So what do we know about the effort to evacuate those citizens?
It's a massive undertaking, Diane. There are, at last check, 9 of those humanitarian corridors providing safe passage for Ukrainian citizens out. And one of those was for the people of Mariupol. They're desperate. They've been under fire for nearly a week now. The advisor to the mayor there said that cars were able to go through the corridor. However, the general situation, as mentioned in Ian's piece, in that city is catastrophic. No food, water, heat, or electricity. And the shelling, it's hindering them from taking to the streets. Diane?
All right, Victor Kenda for us in Poland. Thanks, Victor.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel.
Сотрудничеству в рамках союзного государства, а на совещании в правительстве обсуждали, как сохранить.
Stop the war, no to war. Those were the words of a Russian protester on state television. She has been named as an editor of the channel. She is believed to be in custody. Joining us now is Fox News contributor Mark Thiessen, a former White House speechwriter. The woman that we just saw run up behind the host of that television program, she was arrested. She has not been seen since. Her lawyers have not seen her. They haven't spoken to her. So no word as to what her living conditions are as of right now behind bars and how she's being treated. But to protest the Ukraine invasion on Russian state television like this, isn't that risking your life? Would you consider this a heroic act?
Oh, it's a completely heroic act. I mean, she's disappeared. No one knows where she is or what's happened to her. And she posted a video. In addition to this, she posted a video on social media preparing for this moment where she said, look, I've been promoting Putin's propaganda for years as an editor on Russian television. I stood silent in 2014 when the first invasion took place. I was silent when he poisoned and then jailed Alexei Navalny, the opposition leader. But I can stay silent no more because my mother is Russian and my father is Ukrainian. And the Ukrainians are our brothers. And this is a war of aggression by Vladimir Putin. I mean, to do this and to put this out on social media and to go on to Russia, this is the equivalent of, like, you know, special report. This is their main broadcast in Russia, where the most people get their news. And to go on and do this is such a heroic act, you know, to get the truth to the Russian people.
Apparently, before storming the set, she recorded a video which looks like it was in her apartment. Let's watch this.
What's happening in Ukraine is a crime, and Russia is the aggressor. And there is only one person responsible for this. This man is Vladimir Putin.
I mean, this woman is a hero. The question, though, is do you think her message got across? And do you believe that maybe this is indicative of how Russians are feeling?
I hope so. I mean, one of the things we don't realize is, like, Putin has invaded Ukraine because he wants to reconstitute the borders of the old Soviet Union, but he's already reconstituted the Soviet Union at home. Vladimir Kara-Murza, who's an aide to Alexei Navalny, the jailed opposition leader, has said that there are twice as many political prisoners in Russia now as there were during the Soviet Union. They have arrested 14,000 people for protesting the war. Well, that's a lot of people that have protested the war in a country where the Russian people aren't getting any news about what's happening in Ukraine. They think that the Ukrainians are greeting the Russian forces as brothers. They don't know that that Putin is carpet bombing maternity hospitals and Orthodox monasteries where they were hiding children and residential neighborhoods and killing thousands of people. They're not aware of this. So we got to break the information monopoly and get the news to them so that they know what there's being done in their name.
Right, and businesses internet to the West is being cut off as of today. Today is the cutoff date. That demand made by President Vladimir Putin. Switching gears completely now, I want to get to President Biden, who has been blaming, as you know, Russia for the surge in gas prices, despite the fact that he has dragged his feet on banning Russia oil imports. What is really behind the price surge?
You know what? It's amazing. The one thing that Americans hate more than presidential incompetence is being lied to. So Americans know that before the war in Ukraine ever began, President Biden unleashed the largest year-over-year rise in gas prices in 30 years. They know that before the war in Ukraine began, we had the worst inflation in 40 years. So to try and turn around and tell the American people this is all Putin's fault, there's nothing we can do, is a flat-out lie, and people know it. What unleashed this? First of all, the war on fossil fuels. When you declare that you're going to end fossil fuels, fossil fuel producers don't drill more wells. It's just that simple. And second, the American Rescue Plan, which poured $1.9 trillion into the economy, overheated the demand side, and when the supply side couldn't keep up, unleashed record inflation, record labor shortage. So you have 11 million unfilled jobs. Nobody's going to drill new wells if they can't find workers. And there's a historic labor shortage in the oil industry. So all these things have come together to create this unprecedented economic crisis. And he turns around, first of all, doesn't want to ban gas, resists it for weeks, then is forced into it by bipartisan majorities in Congress that push him for it, and then within nanoseconds starts blaming Vladimir Putin for all of the problems that he unleashed on the American economy.
Look, gas prices were up over $1 before this war started. We all know it. We all fill up our gas tanks. It's now over $4 and rising, over $7 in some cities. So there just doesn't seem to be an end in sight. They just need to own it. Inflation, it's somebody's fault, and it ain't Putin's. Mark Thiessen, thank you very much.
Amen.
Hi, everyone. I'm Brian Kilmeade. I want you to do me a favor. I want you to click to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page. This is the only way that I know for sure that you're not going to miss any great commentary, any great news bites, any great interviews coming your way on Fox. You can get it all here on YouTube.
To respond to Russia's aggression, we need to be strong to get peace. That is why we are building on efforts to cut off the funding for Putin's war machine through sanctions. And today, Madam Deputy Speaker, I can announce we will go further than ever before by hitting over 360 more people complicit with Putin's regime. They range from former President Dmitry Medvedev and Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu to Putin's propagandist Maria Zakharova. This means after today, we will have designated over 1,000 individuals and entities under our Russian sanctions regime. And we are using our new powers under the Economic Crime Act to maximize that impact. This would not have been possible without the extraordinary efforts of colleagues across this Parliament to help get this legislation through the House so quickly. And it shows our collective determination to lead by example in punishing the Putin regime. In December, I will go.
I'm very grateful. He's right that we're sanctioning a lot of people, but in actual fact, we name the people who are sanctioned, and it's other people that then do the sanctioning by not engaging with them on a financial basis, not buying or selling properties and all the rest of it. One of the difficulties at the moment is that it's phenomenally difficult to find out on the Foreign Office sanctions list who is and isn't sanctioned. So, for instance, the members of the Duma, who I gather it was announced last week were sanctioned, they're still not on the Foreign Office website list, so far as I can see anyway. So I just wonder whether there's a way of making this far more readily available to the wider population, because we need to deal not just with the people who have £20 million houses that we've all heard of, but the people who've got £750,000 flats in London, bought with Russian dirty money, the many relatives, for instance, of Abramovich and his ex-partners, each one of those needs to be dealt with, and each one of those properties needs to be seized.
The honourable gentleman makes an important point about ensuring that we give due publicity to the people, institutions and entities that have been sanctioned. I'll ensure that the suggestion that he has made is listened to by the department. In December, we brought our G7 partners together in Liverpool to warn Putin that invading Ukraine would have massive consequences. And indeed, we have followed through on that pledge. We have worked with our allies to cut off sectors of the Russian economy by targeting its defence companies, its trade and transport sector, and kicking banks out of the SWIFT financial system. We have led the way in our financial sanctions, targeting 10 Russian banks, and we have hit over £300 billion worth of Russian bank assets. All this amounts to the toughest sanctions package of any country. And we will work with and encourage all our allies to keep ratcheting up their efforts as well. We will continue to provide lethal military aid to Ukraine. We were the first European country to send defensive weapons, and we have already donated over 3,600 NLAW anti-tank weapons and are also now supplying Javelin missiles.
President Biden is considering a trip to Europe as the Ukraine war escalates. He could potentially meet with NATO allies to discuss the ongoing response to Russia's invasion. And this comes as the U.S. holds talks with China as well as Washington as well. Now, Washington has warned Beijing against helping Moscow as this conflict intensifies and sparks major geopolitical concerns. So for more on all of this, we want to bring in Nancy Cordes. She is with us now, joining us from the White House. Nancy, let's first talk about this potential trip to Europe for President Biden. What are the plans thus far?
Well, Anne-Marie and Vlad, as you can imagine, this is all coming together very quickly and could change based on events on the ground in Ukraine. But what we're hearing right now is that White House officials are looking to have the president go overseas to meet with NATO allies in Europe as soon as next week. That would involve a stop most likely in Brussels, in Belgium, where NATO is headquartered. And then, of course, it's possible he could make other stops in Europe as well. We're still waiting for more details. But obviously, this is both for the president to consult face-to-face with allies that up until this point he's mostly been speaking to in video calls and on the phone, but also to send a powerful message to Vladimir Putin that all these allies are on the same page and they are all standing united against him. We saw something similar this morning when, in an act of bravery and solidarity, the leaders of Poland, the Czech Republic, and Slovenia all boarded a train from Poland, crossed the border into Ukraine, and despite the bombs falling there, went to Kyiv to meet face-to-face with the Ukrainian President Zelensky, again, taking some personal risk in order to send that message to Putin, to the wider world, that they're standing with Zelensky in this difficult time.
Speaking of messages, Nancy, the United States says China will face consequences if China aids Russia in any way. We know, as you reported, that Jake Sullivan spent about 7 hours in a meeting with his Chinese counterpart yesterday. Right. And that was a planned meeting, but of course it probably had new urgency given what's transpired over the last couple of weeks. And so what is China's strategy here? I know that there's been a lot of reporting that China, while not completely condemning Russia's actions, is still seeking to sort of stay above the fray or maybe act sort of as a middleman between what they call two aging superpowers.
Right. This is tricky for China because on one hand, yes, they do have a long-standing relationship and common interests with Russia. On the other hand, leaders in China are reportedly very dismayed by what they're seeing come out of Russia and the clear stumbles that the Russian military has experienced in Ukraine, not to mention the fact that the Russian military went into Ukraine in the first place. And China is well aware that if they are seen as aiding Russia militarily, economically, there are even reports that the Russians are asking the Chinese for MREs, meals ready to eat for the troops that are in Ukraine. Things have gotten that bad. They know that they could face sanctions from the U.S. and from other countries around the world because those threats have been made in public. Here's an interesting new development, Vlad and Anne-Marie. The Chinese foreign minister was on a call yesterday with his Spanish counterpart. And afterwards, the Spaniards released kind of a readout of that call. They said that what the Chinese foreign minister told his Spanish counterpart was, quote, China is not a party to this crisis, nor does it want the sanctions to affect China. And that is the biggest indication we've gotten so far that China isn't planning to provide Russia with military assistance, economic assistance, because they know that that would lead to sanctions on Chinese goods. That's something they want to avoid.
And you know, when you think about it, guys, the entire world's economy is trying to stumble out of this COVID pandemic. China was hit particularly hard. I'm sure they don't want a round of sanctions when they're just trying to sort of get healthy again. So let me ask you about this, Nancy. CBS News YouGov polling shows that 52% of Americans think that President Biden's actions toward Russia have not been strong enough. How's the White House reacting to this?
You know, I think that the White House is well aware that it is almost impossible to hit a sweet spot when it comes to public opinion and matters of war and peace. And interestingly, they have shown a great willingness over the past few weeks to do things that they know might not be particularly popular in the moment or might carry some political risk. For example, there have been a number of times where even though they've been working in concert with European allies behind the scenes, they sort of have let the Europeans take the lead on certain issues, like when it comes to sanctions or establishing no-fly zones for the Russians over their countries, because they don't necessarily feel that there's a value in the U.S. looking like the 800-pound gorilla here. And so, you know, they've shown a willingness to kind of ignore the chatter and the public opinion, and certainly a great deal of criticism that is still coming from Republicans about everything from oil and gas prices to this no-fly zone, to transferring planes to the Ukrainians. You know, they believe that if they do a careful job and a good job steering the U.S. through this crisis, that there will be a reward in public opinion at the end.
Nancy Cordes at the White House. Nancy, thanks.
You're welcome.
Now to the latest from Ukraine. The U.S. just issued new sanctions on the Belarusian president who allied with Russia, and Russian troops are getting closer to Kyiv this morning as strikes hit a residential neighborhood. Meanwhile, leaders of 3 European unions, Poland, the Czech Republic, and Slovenia, are planning a visit to the city to show support for the country. Since Russia invaded, officials say nearly 3 million people have now fled the country. That's the biggest refugee crisis Europe has seen since World War II. And while many have kept faith they'll see their home country again, others realize it may be a long time.
When war started, I said that I don't want to go from Ukraine, from Kyiv, because I hope that it will be for a week, but now I understand that it follows.
Russian and Ukrainian negotiators are planning another day of talks. In the meantime, Ukrainian officials say new aid and evacuation efforts will happen today along 9 corridors around the country.
यूक्रेन जंग जोरों पर है। अमेरिका का दावा है कि रूसी फौज की पेशकदमी रोक दी गई है। यूक्रेन के सदर ज़ेलेंस्की ने रूसी फौज से कहा है कि वो हथियार डाल दे, जबकि कीव में धमाके सुनाई दे रहे हैं। ताज़ा हमले में रूस की बमबारी से एक अपार्टमेंट की इमारत तबाह हो गई।
Okay, I have to. Well, I can't translate this, of course, but the title underneath says, "China warns USA." That was 33 minutes ago.
Ambassador, when will Vladimir Putin stop his war crimes? When will you stop this obscene assault against Ukraine? And will Vladimir Putin surrender?
And what?
Will Vladimir Putin surrender?
I heard the first part. And what's surrender what?
Surrender your assault and barbaric war against Ukraine. Will you stop in the sake of humanity?
When the goals of the special military operations are achieved, it will stop. It was announced from the very beginning. I must tell you that I appreciate your humane approach, but I didn't see that humane approach. In all these 8 years, when Ukrainian forces, Ukrainian armed forces and radicals were shelling and bombing Donetsk and Lugansk without any reproach, basically any reproach from the international community, from the no comments from the UN officials on that issue. Yesterday, there was a barbaric attack of the Ukrainian armed forces who used cluster munitions in which Russia is accused based on sources which cannot be identified. But they used the cluster munition in the center of Donetsk. 21 persons died, 30 plus wounded. No comments. I was looking through news, including Western media today. I didn't come across a single article on that barbaric attack. Yesterday, Secretary General made a stakeout. He didn't say a word on that attack. Only when asked a question, he said that if that was deliberate, it is condemnable. I must tell you that we are very much concerned how UN officials, including the top ones, including the Secretary General, including Under Secretary General Rosemary DiCarlo, are assessing the situation in Ukraine, accusing Russia of indiscriminate attacks. Secretary General yesterday said that although that attack is condemnable, the most of the destruction comes from the Russian sources, as if he was comparing two events and implying that that attack didn't deserve condemnation.
Ambassador, it's Pamela Falk from CBS News, as you know. My question is about a ceasefire. What would it take for Russia to have an overall, not just humanitarian ceasefire? What does Ukraine need to do? And what's in your resolution? What are you proposing on humanitarian corridors? Thank you.
I cited a few things obvious for a humanitarian resolution. You will see it soon, shortly, because it will be published.
For an overall ceasefire.
Negotiated ceasefire. Of course, it should be negotiated, and the ceasefire will take place when conditions that were put forward by Russia will be implemented, and they are very well known.
And could you just lay it out what those conditions are?
Demilitarization of Ukraine, denazification of Ukraine, no threat which would come from that territory, from that country to Russia, no joining NATO. President Zelensky announced take place when conditions that he understands that Ukraine will not join NATO, citing in particular his disappointment with the way NATO reacted, but the goal of Ukraine joining NATO is in the Ukrainian constitution, so it should be dropped from there first and foremost. I think that's enough.
Question, Ambassador, on the parallels we hear, sir, between the U.S. invasion of Iraq in 2003. You've been very critical. Russia has been very critical. You've also been very critical of the 2011 invasion attack on Libya led by NATO. Are there parallels between what the U.S. did in 2003 and the unilateral actions we are seeing from Russia and the criticism that is being leveled against UN officials that are simply seeking to defend the UN Charter?
Every situation is unique, but I do not recall the level of outrage, hysterics that U.S. invasion of Iraq.
They tried to get Kofi Annan fired.
Sorry?
They tried to get Kofi Annan fired, so I would argue there were...
No resolutions, nothing, if you remember. No resolution of the Security Council, nothing that would be comparable to what we're experiencing today. Thank you very much.
Понятно, что это все самопально, но оно рабочее. То есть все работает, спуск, все классно. Нажимает на кнопку и происходит стрельба автоматически. Мы делаем вот такую вот штуку. То есть, чтобы можно было с ним как бы носить в руках. Он более мощный, чем автомат Калашникова.
Мы собрали, получается, сварщиков, собрали механиков, всем раздали эти чертежи, мы все посмотрели, сделали опытный образец, и все получилось. Все получилось, и вот сейчас мы, собственно, делаем и готовы принимать максимальное количество этого оружия. Мы сейчас рассказали об этом на фронте. Ребята снимают уже с вражеских БТР это оружие, везут сюда, и мы будем максимально, что можем делать, переделывать это оружие, чтобы оно, как мы уже говорили, развернулось не в нашу сторону, а в сторону врага.
Просто був підбитий трофейний БТР, в ньому було дуже багато боєкомплекту, також стояв такий танковий кулемет. До мене прийшла просто думка, що можна його використовувати як укріпрайон, і мені захотілося цією зброєю працювати і захищати власні території. Тут воно кріпиться у башню.
Another example of the resiliency of Ukrainian defense forces is the surprisingly
lethal impact its use of relatively cheap drones has had on Russian forces. This video, posted on Twitter by a journalist in Turkey, shows a Russian missile launcher sitting in the open. Suddenly, it's consumed by a huge fireball. That was a work of a Turkish-made TB2 drone. The unmanned drone can hover over tanks and destroy them, seemingly with devastatingly accurate missile fire. So why are Ukraine's cheap, slow drones so successful against Russian targets? For that, let's bring in NBC News correspondent covering national security and intelligence, Ken Delaney. Ken, explain. And how effective have they been? How many Russian targets have they been able to take out?
Good morning, Mika. We don't know the answer to that for sure, but a U.S. defense official briefed reporters yesterday and said they had used these weapons the Ukrainians had to great effect against the Russians. One expert has tracked as many as 30 individual strikes against Russian vehicles. And the reason this is so confounding to experts, we knew the Ukrainians had about 20 of these small drones before this conflict. And when I would ask military experts about their impact, they would say, oh, don't even think about those. The Russians will make quick work of that weapon system. They can jam them with electronics, and if they can't do that, they can shoot them down because they fly so slowly, like 110 miles an hour. Once again, the experts overestimated the competence of the Russian military because this system is flying in Ukraine and it's hitting Russian vehicles, including the very missile systems that are supposed to be able to take it down. And what's remarkable about this drone system is that, you know, we're all used to the Reaper and Predator drones that the U.S. military and the CIA flies. They fire Hellfire missiles. Those are $30 million a piece. These drones cost about $1 to $2 million. They fire small missiles. And one big question is, what is the U.S. doing to make sure that the Ukrainians are resupplied with this weapon system? A defense official said yesterday they're working to do that, didn't offer any specifics. Turkey, which is trying to remain neutral in this conflict, appears to have sold them some more systems at the beginning, according to the Ukrainian defense minister. But some people are wondering, why aren't we rushing more of these kinds of weapons? There's another type of drone called the kamikaze drone, Mika, which is actually like a flying bomb. It's a guided missile that could be even more effective in large numbers by the Ukrainians, because unlike the javelins, which you have to get pretty close to a tank with a javelin, you can launch these kamikaze drones from up to 8 miles away. So remember that long convoy of vehicles. That could have been decimated.
Yeah, let me ask you that question, Ken. A lot of people that are watching, I bet everybody that's watching right now is going, why aren't we supplying more of these?
Well, you know, I had a conversation with a Hill staffer about a U.S. system called the Switchblade, which is a kamikaze drone that the U.S. military fields, but it's not approved for export anywhere except the United Kingdom. So there is a concern about sharing this technology. But this is pretty old technology, like 10 years old. The Russians have a version of this. The Chinese have it. The Israelis make some kamikaze drones. So they are available on the market. And it's a great question why more haven't been sent to the Ukrainians. You know, there is some training involved in using these systems, Joe. And there's actually been reports that that Turkish military advisors have been on the scene to help the Ukrainians operate these drones. But open question why more have not been sent.
So, Ken, what administration officials put to me is that also a lot of these Russian targets are sort of sitting ducks. They're taking no real effort to try to hide themselves, you know, obscure heat sources or anything like that, and therefore these drones can just pick them off. And it goes to part of one of the more confounding mysteries of this entire conflict: Russia's inability to secure the skies. What have officials you've talked to, why do they think Russia has not been able to control the airspace over Ukraine?
You know, it's a great mystery. One theory is that the initial operation was really not normally the way the Russians fight. It was like a pinprick. It was such a small effort that Putin thought he was going to topple the regime by sending in sort of cursory forces. And they didn't bring in all the air defenses that they normally operate with. They didn't do the electronic jamming that people thought they were capable of. And so they don't have the basic air defenses. They have not been able to achieve air superiority such that they can't even take these lumbering, small, non-stealthy drones out of the air, Jonathan.
President Biden is considering a trip to Europe as the. For more on all of this, we want to bring in Nancy Cordes.
involve a stop most likely in Brussels, in Belgium, where NATO is headquartered. And then, of course, it's possible he could make other stops in Europe as well. We're still waiting for more details. But obviously, this is both for the president to consult face-to-face with allies that up until this point he's mostly been speaking to in video calls and on the phone, but also to send a powerful message to Vladimir Putin that all these allies are on the same page and they are all standing united against him. We saw something similar this morning when, in an act of bravery and solidarity, the leaders of Poland, the Czech Republic, and Slovenia all boarded a train from Poland, crossed the border into Ukraine, and despite the bombs falling there, went to Kyiv to meet face-to-face with the Ukrainian President Zelensky, again, taking some personal risk in order to send that message to Putin, to the wider world, that they're standing with Zelensky in this difficult time.
Speaking of messages, Nancy, the United States says China will face consequences if China aids Russia in any way. We know, as you reported, that Jake Sullivan spent about 7 hours in a meeting with his Chinese counterpart yesterday. Right. And that was a planned meeting, but of course it probably had new urgency given what's transpired over the last couple of weeks. And so what is China's strategy here? I know that there's been a lot of reporting that China, while not completely condemning Russia's actions, is still seeking to sort of stay above the fray or maybe act sort of as a middleman between what they call two aging superpowers.
Right. This is tricky for China because on one hand, yes, they do have a long-standing relationship and common interests with Russia. On the other hand, leaders in China are reportedly very dismayed by what they're seeing come out of Russia and the clear stumbles that the Russian military has experienced in Ukraine, not to mention the fact that the Russian military went into Ukraine in the first place. And China is well aware that if they are seen as aiding Russia militarily, economically, there are even reports that the Russians are asking the Chinese for MREs, meals ready to eat for the troops that are in Ukraine. Things have gotten that bad. They know that they could face sanctions from the U.S. and from other countries around the world because those threats have been made.
Yeah, that's such a strange story unless the Russians are not good in making those foods that can last a long while in their packaging. Because we have seen photos of Russians with their battlefield, how do you call this? What they eat, all the powders you have to put in water, other stuff. These were only good up till 2015. So the date says on the box. But we know from all kinds of countries around the world that also make these foods that they might last even 40 years longer than the date. The date is just a quality guarantee. You have to open them and see for yourself if it is good or not, and it probably is. 2015, that's only 7 years over date, not 40. So when 10, 20, 30, 40 years over date is still good, then the Russians must have made real bad packaging. It's a weird story, that one, to my opinion.
Development, Vlad and Anne-Marie. The Chinese foreign minister was on a call yesterday with his Spanish counterpart. And afterwards, the Spaniards released kind of a readout of that call. They said that what the Chinese foreign minister told his Spanish counterpart was, quote, China is not a party to this crisis, nor does it want the sanctions to affect China.
Сотрудничеству в рамках союзного государства, а на совещании в правительстве обсуждали, как сохранить
Greetings to you, Sherwin. Of course, we were listening in on that briefing, the Russian ambassador addressing the media today. Vasily talking seemingly a little bit defensive there about Russia's stance. Well, I mean, I suppose that's not very surprising, but Russia is saying that it will put forth its own draft of resolutions regarding the humanitarian situation in Ukraine. I mean, what are we likely to get out of that, given what we saw today and how defensive they were? I mean, if we're talking particularly about the humanitarian corridors, for example, what's likely to come out of this? And maybe you can take us back to what was said in this particular briefing.
Well, essentially, I mean, kudos to the Russian ambassador, right? He comes out to face a number of hostile questions, in a sense, because there are a lot of perspectives, certainly in Western regions like the United States, that are quite antithetical to what the Russian Federation is saying in relation to its invasion, its war, its, quote, military operation in Ukraine. He came out to talk about a draft resolution that was withdrawn in the Security Council. You and I have talked about this effort led by France and Mexico for a humanitarian resolution that would essentially put into international law the notion of unhindered humanitarian access. You talk about these humanitarian corridors that have been quite controversial in terms of people being able to exit Ukraine to a country of their choice, be it Poland, be it Romania, be it Moldova, and so forth. And so the Mexican and French ambassador yesterday came out and said, look, we're withdrawing that process, that negotiation process in the Security Council, essentially because it wasn't going anywhere. And they will now take that draft resolution to the General Assembly, where it will not have the binding legal ramifications that a UN Security Council resolution would have, but it would certainly give a sense of global sentiment, much like the earlier resolution that was adopted by 141 member states in favor in terms of condemning Russia's unilateral actions in Ukraine. The Russians are now saying, Flo, that they are going to put their own draft resolution on the table that could be voted on in the Security Council as early as today. Some of the operating paragraphs, I've just received this, I'm reading it with you, essentially saying that they demand that civilians, including humanitarian personnel and persons in vulnerable situations, including women and children, be fully protected, right? This would kind of go against the images that we are seeing, the widespread images of civilian shelling, neighborhoods where civilians are housed, hospitals, kindergartens. The UN saying they have credible reports that cluster munitions, which are illegal under international law, being used in the main by the Russian military. This draft resolution will also demand that all parties concerned ensure the respect for and protection of all medical personnel and humanitarian personnel, calls on all parties concerned to allow safe and unhindered passage of to destinations outside of Ukraine, condemns all violations of international humanitarian law. Look, this is hot off the press, Flow. We'll take a deeper dive into that and present it later in our programming. But essentially the Russians saying, okay, Mexico and France want to go to the General Assembly. We're putting our own draft resolution on humanitarian access in the UN Security Council, and a vote could be expected later today. We don't know where the chips will fall. This, of course, just announced a short time ago by Russian Ambassador Vasily Nebenzia. Flo.
You know, while the ambassador was standing up there addressing the media, I think it was you who asked, or certainly someone who sounded like you, asking when would they stop their aggression. And it seemed very much, from where I'm sitting anyway, that question aggravated the ambassador. And I'm not sure where his answer was going. Can you take us back to that? Because it seemed as though he almost pointed at another situation being the problem, and that, you know, they weren't being aggressive in a certain way. I didn't quite understand what he was trying to say there.
Look, one has to sort of sift through some of the responses here, because, you know, it's difficult sometimes for these officials. They really are caught between a rock and a hard place, because, you know, information in terms of what might be happening on the ground, the military operation in Russia, takes time to filter through to diplomats here in New York. That was a colleague from Fox News, actually, asking about when this war would stop and what essentially it would take. And so I need to go back and really sift through what the ambassador was saying there. But in terms of some of the demands that the Russian Federation has wanted here is an assurance from Ukraine, for example, that they would not expand in a westward direction. They would not join the EU. They would not join NATO. And so those are some of the long-standing prerequisites that we've heard from the Russian Federation, which have been rebuffed certainly by Western nations and most notably rebuffed by the Ukrainian leadership. I did ask the ambassador a question later, Flo. I think I sounded a little bit more like myself. I asked him about the parallels that are being drawn between the invasion of Iraq by the United States in 2003 based on the faulty intelligence, right, of weapons of mass destruction, which were quickly debunked then and have been debunked ever since. And in addition, Russia's posture as it related to the 2011 attack led by NATO on Libya, which has, of course, led to vast insecurity and the ramifications and consequences still felt today in vast regions of the Sahel region. And I said, are there no parallels here in terms of the unilateral nature of your action, but also the criticism that is leveled at UN officials in terms of their defense of the UN Charter? He said, every situation is unique. And he doesn't recall the level of outrage that Russia is today experiencing in terms of what the U.S. experienced back in 2003. I then retorted and said the U.S. worked very diligently to get Kofi Annan, then the Secretary General of the United Nations, ousted from the organization. It was a huge controversy. African nations had to rally behind Kofi Annan in terms of the United States' backdoor efforts to get him ousted as UN Secretary General, particularly over his stance in relation to the invasion of Iraq. And the ambassador said that, well, there were no resolutions and nothing in comparison to what we experienced there, and then he walked off. So we're going to go through all that footage again, Flo, and put it together in a package for later programming today.
Just as we wrap up our conversation, this is a question that I've posed repeatedly to some of the analysts we've spoken to about this conflict, and it's been the issue of sanctions. I mean, you're in New York now, you're in the US, and there is a sense that, you know, these particular sanctions that have been imposed are actually hitting back on the U.S. itself. And, what I was asking analysts was, these sanctions, could they end up being a situation of cutting the nose to spite the face? And I wonder if that's starting to trickle down, if that indeed is what we're starting to see in the U.S.
Absolutely. The fuel prices, I mean, that we've sort of seen a recession in terms of the oil, crude oil prices now dipping below $100. That will be immediately felt at the pumps here in the United States. But a big concern, particularly in the context of a congressional election in November that will essentially decide the control of both houses of Congress. There is a rising inflation in the United States even before the invasion of Ukraine, and the ripple effects, right? You heard the Secretary General talking about how there is a risk now to countries, particularly in the developing world, that are seeking to recover from the COVID-19 pandemic, that are now being hit with this war. Ukraine and Russia are responsible for 29% of global wheat outputs. This affects the poorest regions of the world, particularly North Africa, the DRC he mentioned, that are dependent on those exports from Ukraine and Russia that are now being disrupted not only by the military intervention, but certainly by the economic punitive measures that have been the response from Western nations against Russia's invasion. So yes, there is a great deal of concern expressed from quarters in the United States, but also here at the United Nations, that there is a risk for greater instability, particularly in poor, vulnerable regions of the world. We talk about the instability that the invasion in 2011 in Libya created in the broader Sahel region, the coups in West Africa. These affects the economic consequences of this, be it from the sanctions that are being imposed or the immediate impacts of the